Okay, we are comparing and ordering rational numbers. This is what these notes are about. And so I need us to highlight, these are the important things we're looking at here, that I can interpret statements of inequality as statements based on the position of rational numbers on a number line. I can write an inequality statement based on the position of two rational numbers on a number line. And I can write, interpret, and explain statements of order for rational numbers. Okay? So the statement right here, it says when comparing rational numbers, you can plot them on a number line. The one that is farther to the right is greater. Plot each pair of numbers and use an inequality symbol to compare them. So when we compare and order numbers, I like to stack them. Like if they're not just regular decimals or whole numbers, I'm going to make my decimals darker. And I'm going to stack my rational numbers here. And when I compare them and I'm stacking them, I'm going to line up my decimal. Okay? And then I'm going to fill in a hole. So I'm comparing 2 and 25 hundredths to 2 and 10 hundredths. So when I put them on the number line, the larger number is 2.25, because even if I look at my whole number, it's 2, but then I have a 2 and a 1. Well, which is bigger? 2. So I have 2.25, and then over here I have 2 and 1/10. Okay? So I'm writing it in its original form on my number line, and then whichever rational number is further to the right is greater. Okay? Now I have negative 75 hundredths and negative 85 hundredths. So if I were to stack those, let's look at it though. All right. So you would say, oh, 85 hundredths must be bigger, but this is negative. Okay? This is negative. So ask yourself, what would be closer to 0 on my negative? It would be 0 and 75 hundredths. So negative 0, 75 hundredths, and then negative 0 and 85 hundredths. So whichever is further to the right is bigger. Okay? This time I have two fractions. I have 1/2 and I have 1/4. Now when we compare fractions, we need to make our denominators the same, okay? So I know that 2 is a factor of 4, so I have my 1/2, and I'm going to make an equivalent fraction where my denominator is 4. So to get from 2 to 4, I multiply by 2, 1 times 2, and I get 2/4. So on my number line, if I'm comparing these two right here, 2/4 and 1/4, okay? Well, I'd rather have 2 and rather than 1. So 2 is bigger than 1. Here I go again, sorry. So remember, when we're comparing fractions, we're not going to compare the denominator because we've made the denominator the same. We're going to compare our numerators, and 2 is bigger than 1. So I'm going to have, but you need to write it in the original form on your number line. I don't care how far apart they are, okay? So 1/2 is bigger. So now I have negative 3/8 and negative 1/8. Now, when we compare, well, first of all, our denominators are the same, so we're going to compare. But in this case, they're negative. So in this case, 1/8 is actually greater than 3/8 because it's closer to 0. So I have negative 1/8, and I have negative 3/8. So 1/8 is greater because it's to the right. Now I have 3.5, these are from UDOs, and 4.3. So we can stack our decimals. So I'm going to put 3.5 below 4.3. And when I look at this, well, just looking at my whole number, we see that 4 is greater than 3. So I'm going to put 4.3 to the right, and then 3.5 to the left, and so 4.3 is greater, and it's going to get snacky on that. Now I have negative 1.4 and negative 1.8, so I'm going to stack these two. See, my first number 1 is the same, but I have my 8 is greater than my 4, but when they are negative, it's opposite. So negative 1 and 4/10 is actually greater than negative 1.8. I have 1/5 and I have 4/5, okay? My denominators are the same, and so I'm going to compare my numerators. 4 is greater than 1. Right there. And then my last pair, I have negative 1/3 and negative 1/6. Before I can compare, I need to make an equivalent fraction. And 3 is also a factor of 6. So I am going to do 1/3, but it's still negative. How do I get from 3 to 6? I multiply by 2. So I have negative 2/6 and negative 1/6. So I'm comparing my numerators, and 2 is greater than 1. But however, when we have negative, it's going to be opposite. So negative 1/6 is actually greater than negative, and we're going to write it in the original form, negative 1/3. Okay? Just like that. Look at our second page. Okay, now we're going to order. When ordering rational numbers, you can also use a number line, order each group of numbers from least to greatest. So we have all decimals here, okay? And so I always like to put my 0 in the middle, and I'm going to look for positives first. So I have 1.75, and I'm going to pause because Miss Nelson walked in. And I'm resuming. Okay, so we're going to order numbers from least to greatest. So I put my 0 in the middle. I'm going to look for positive numbers first. So I'm going to stack my positive numbers. And then 1.25. I'm going to put a 0 here, so we're ordering. So my greatest, so if I'm going to look at just whole numbers in the front, 2.5 should be to all the way to the right. So 2.5. And then if I look at, I'm going to cross him out. I'm going to put a check right here. My second digit, 7 and 2, 7 is greater than 2, so I have 1.75. And then I have 1.25. I'm not too worried about spacing right now. And check that off, check that off. Now I have negatives. So coming over here, negative 0.75 and negative 1.5. So when we're looking at this, I'm going to fill in my 0. Okay. So which of these is closer to 0? Because if I was just comparing, I'd say, oh, 1.5 is greater, but it's negative. So this is actually the opposite. 1 5/10 is actually smaller than 7/500. So I'm going to put negative 7/500, and then I'm going to have negative 1.5. There it is. Let's look at this we do. So I have 0. We're going to put that in the middle. Yay. Yay for an easy one. 0. But you have negative 1/3, negative 8/9, 1 2/9, and 7/9. So I'm gonna worry about my positives first. So if I have 1 2/9, and then I have 7/9, well, 7/9 is going to be smaller. Okay, it's less than 1, and then I have 1 2/9. Okay, I'm going to mark those off so we know we've used them, but now I have negative 1/3 and negative 8/9. Well, we can't compare these two negative numbers until we have a common denominator. So I know that 3 is a factor of 9, so we're going to make an equivalent fraction, okay? We multiply by 3 to get to 9, so I multiply my numerator by 3, and I have 3/9. I have negative 3/9. So negative 3/9 and negative 8/9. Now again, you'd say, oh, but 3/9 is smaller than 8/9. But when dealing with negatives, it's the opposite. negative 3/9 is actually greater, which is closer to 0, but we're going to write it in our original form, negative 1/3, and then negative 8/9. Okay? Let's look at these few u-dos. I have 85/100, negative 65/100, 5/10, negative 55/100, and negative 25/100. Okay, so I'm going to look at my positive numbers first. I'm going to fill in a hole there. That's it. I only have 2. So if I have, and put my 0 in the middle. Okay, so which is greater? Well, I see that there's nothing in my whole number spot, but 8 is greater than 5. So 5/10, or 5/10, because that's my original form, is closer to 0. And then 85/100 comes after that. Now, I'm going to put a check by those because we've used them. And I have negative 65/100, negative 55/100, and negative 25/100. So I'm going to write these all down. Okay, so I don't have a whole number, but then I look at my tenths. I have 6, 5, and 2. Now you might say, but 6 is bigger, but negative. So actually, the 2 25/100 will be my greatest. It's closest to 0. And then working to the left would be 55/100, negative 55/100, and then negative 65/100. Be rounding that out. Okay. And then I have negative 2 1/4, 1 1/2, negative 1 3/4, negative 1/2, and 3/4. So I'm going to look for my positives first. I have 1 1/2 and 3/4. So I have 1 1/2, I have 3/4. So if we're going to compare, we need our denominators to be equivalent. So I know 2 is a factor of 4. So I'm going to come over here and make an equivalent fraction. So 2 to 4 is times 2. So now I'm comparing 1 2/4 to 3/4. Well, you're probably like, Ms. Collins, there's a whole number. It was a mixed number. It was bigger. But that's okay. It doesn't hurt us to practice writing equivalent fractions. So 3/4, and then moving to the right, we will have 1, where am I at? 1 1/2, because I need you to put it in its original form. So I'm going to mark off. We've used that, we've used that. So now I have negative 2 1/4, negative 3/4, and negative 1/2. Now, so we did use this strategy here to write equivalent, to write an equivalent fraction with a decimal, with a denominator. Ooh, okay, we're back. Sorry. All right, so over here, we've placed 3/4 and 1/2, but I have negative 1/2, I have negative 1 3/4, and negative 2 1/4. So if I am just looking at my whole number to start with, okay, remember these are negatives and there's no whole number here. So we want which is smaller, which is closer to 0. That would be greater, and that's going to be 1/2, negative 1/2. So you see in this case, we didn't have to write a fraction with an equivalent denominator. Okay, and then if I'm looking at my whole numbers, closer to 0 is the negative 1 3/4, and then the negative 2 1/4. And that's it. Yeah. So let's look at that last one. Negative 1/5, 4/5, 2/10, negative 1/10, and negative 15/100. That's ugly, isn't it? We are going to work on some equivalent fractions because we have decimals and fractions, and I recommend that you convert to either decimals or fractions to compare. Okay, so I am going to start with putting a 0 in the center. Okay, and I have negative 1500ths, negative 1/10, positive 2/10, and positive 4/5. So I'm going to come over here and do 4 divided by 5 and turn this into a decimal. Well, 5 cannot go into 4, so that's a 0. So decimal, decimal, 0. 5 goes into 40 5 times. No, 8 times, excuse me. Okay, so now I have 8/10. So if I compare 8/10 and 2/10, 2/10 is closer to 0. But then you got to write this back in its original form. So then I have 4/5. Now if I'm just looking at my negatives now, these are ugly. We got to turn these little nuggets into decimals. Let's start with this one, 1/10. So when you hear that, 1/10, right? It's going to look like this, 1/10. Huh. Okay, and I'm going to start stacking these to negative 15 hundredths. And then I have 1 divided by 5. 1 divided by 5, decimal, decimal, 0. 5 goes into 10 twice. So I have 2/10. I have negative 2/10. Now the thing is, you want what's closer to 0. So in this case, you think that 20 hundredths is bigger, but it's not. It's actually negative 1/10. Excuse me, we're going to 1/10. But we're going to come over here and write it in this form. Negative 1/10. And then the next in order would be 15, closer. So negative 0 and 15 hundredths. And then my last one is negative 1/5. So we've got to put it in its original form. It's a lot, guys, but we can do it.